Hey, everybody, and welcome to another sort of reading analysis for a culture studies course in American Culture Studies. Today, we're looking through the book called Technoskepticism. And I guess before we really get started diving into some of the things that stuck out to me, and I guess I'll sort of offer some editorialization and my opinions of some of the stuff that I've read through and that really stuck out to me. But in the introduction to the book, the authors were talking about just the process of creating this piece of work, talking about sort of, I guess, scholars from different universities and, you know, mm, cross programs and that sort of stuff really just deciding that they were going to get together for a long weekend and rent a cabin, I think it was, and just work through and get the basis of the foundation of what became this book on techno-skepticism. And I was thinking about how interesting of an experience that would be as an academic, just sort of collectively getting together with other colleagues or other like-minded individuals and working through something like this and just getting a piece of work done, getting published and adding that to a Vita and stuff like that. And I had never really envisioned the process working quite like that. So I thought just the sort of like the image transfer of what that experience must have been like was, kind of fascinating to me. Um, and thinking about how, wouldn't that be nice to just be able to sort of put the regular life on hold for a weekend and go hold up with a couple of other academic people entrenched in the same sort of world and work through a book like this. And then also it had me thinking about how unique it is, and this wouldn't be the first example of this happening, but when academics get together and they start working through materials such as this and they start to create concepts, and techno-skepticism, I think, fits that category. Not exactly a word on its own, but something that was created for this purpose. And not to say that it doesn't have any real meaning or something like that, but that it was an invention of these like-minded individuals that decided to work this all out. So hats off to the authors for working through that in a way that seems fun and also meaningful at the same time. Okay. What I'm going to do here is sort of read through a couple of different passages from the book that stood out to me, and then hopefully apply some sort of meaningful, opinionated work on top of that of my own. But I think it's important to start with just what the author's sort of interpretation or their own definition of what techno-skepticism is. And I found that in the introduction section on page 8, if you want to take a look at that. But basically, they say that techno-skepticism stakes out a position between optimism, whether the zeal for unlimited progress that animates the technology industry or our own queer, black, or brown visions of better worlds, and outright refusal. Techno-skepticism mediates between the two poles of optimism and refusal. As we noted earlier, techno-skepticism compels us to wrangle with the complexities of singularity and solidarity, whether that wrangling involves guerrilla bathroom tactics or the flagrant taking of naps. It makes space for ambivalence and for the paradoxical cohabitation of joy and doubt, curiosity and caution. So there's that little sort of defining moment in the introduction section of techno-skepticism. And I have to say that in the tradition of academics being sort of tough to crack a little bit, well, we get lots of sort of opposing things here, don't we? The complexities of singularity and solidarity, the paradoxical cohabitation of joy and doubt. Okay, so this techno-skepticism idea sort of encapsulates all of these different things and mediates between the two poles of optimism and refusal. That's interesting. So I guess where I'm sort of pulling from here is that technoskepticism is derived from a world where technology is forefront of everything that we do in our lives, and we meaning people in, I suppose, the um, modern or uh, maybe that's not the correct term, um, advanced Western world. So technology is of great importance in the lives of the people that I just described. But at the same time, the skepticism part comes in while being able to think critically about what's being presented to you through technology. Maybe that means being able to mediate between this and that as opposed to just thinking in one particular way. So being a skeptic doesn't necessarily mean you have a negative connotation with whatever's being presented to you through the technology, but it means that you're able to think critically about it and compare and contrast and think about both ends of a spectrum, perhaps, and everywhere in between. So that's my take on like sort of what we're getting ourselves into. And then the next important passage that that I found, a couple passages actually, beginning with the desiring diagnosis section on page 12. The authors say, here we introduce and eventually will end with the question of the impermanence of diagnosis and the potential of reclaiming self-diagnosis. We do so because self-diagnosis is both complicated and provocative. Reading this, you might be concerned that we're promoting disinformation, encouraging social media users to appropriate embodied experiences that aren't theirs, and in some ways, you're probably right. Encouraging brazen and prolific self-identification opens the floodgates to all means and modes of claiming disability experience. But this is precisely the point. In writing this, we find it important to note that each of the conditions we've named so far brings with it problems of diagnostic access, as does those conditions we have not named. Diagnostic inaccessibility stems from various systemic barriers, not the least of which are persistent clinical disbelief, disproportionate access to care, and the illegibility of of one's own symptoms. One's very body becomes a set of symptoms and behaviors to decode within existing clinical narratives and diagnostic criteria for what counts as given condition. In response to this diagnostic minefield, we want to draw the disinformation toward disability, jamming the clinical categories that contort our body minds into untenable positions. Wow. Then they go on to say that in the following sections, we'll take you on a winding crypt journey. So it's interesting that really this is the first official section of the book outside of an introduction. So it really sets us up for, I guess, what they said, a winding journey. So this diagnosis and disinformation, I guess they're setting us up for, just to understand where the skepticism part comes from in technoskepticism. Diagnostic access, right? So what peoples maybe don't have access to the same types of information or information in the same way? Well, how does misinformation or disinformation really affect people? And who are the people that disinformation affects the most? Disinformation is really a problem of an elite number of people that have access to the technology to be disinformed by, right? So if you don't have access, then how could you be susceptible to disinformation? You're just only susceptible to the true information that you're getting from another individual in a personal experience as opposed to some sort of technological method, right? Like a news feed on a social media platform or an echo chamber found because of some sort of algorithmic tool that is sifting through existing material and only offering certain things to certain people. Um, yeah, it's a deep rabbit hole to think about and to start really considering. There's another section about the desiring diagnosis section of the book that I found interesting. So I'll read through that section as well. So again, the authors say, we begin by describing how digital diagnostics are presented as fixes to existing but insufficient diagnostic criteria. They assume that increasing the digitization process will correct the problem of inaccurate solutions to disabled people's supposed problems. We then continue by analyzing how digital diagnostics are positioned as arbiters of diagnostic truth that remedy the problem of self-reporting by creating a new eugenic practice, digital phenotyping. The outsourcing of diagnosis to machines indexes the ongoing mistrust and contempt for certain human bodies belonging to BIPOC disabled people, and especially those underdiagnosed because of the medical racism. Similarly, when teen girls who use TikTok claim they have Tourette's, ADHD, and autism, their self-diagnoses are derided as Munchausen's by TikTok. At the same time, the rhetorical and epistemological power of diagnosis often serves as a means to control, understand, and make meaning out of disabled bodies. This is especially true when those diagnoses are wielded by clinicians and parents and not by disabled people themselves, as we show through a close reading of the case of Ashley X, a child diagnosed with static encephalopathy, which raised debates about medical ethics in the aughts. We conclude by describing how disability activists like Alice Wong have leveraged mutual aid networks, why we love these networks, and why unabashed self-diagnosis may be the most desirable adjunct to treatment for those who are so rarely believed in our age of automated abandonment and misdiagnosis at scale. Okay, so now we're really getting into the idea that, I guess consuming, say, as the example here provides, TikTok, social media platform content, might lead people to self-diagnose themselves as having ADHD as an easy example. So if you're able to, or if you're willing to self-diagnose yourself based on content that you've consumed, and you're already willing to sort of take that leap and believe in the diagnosis fully, then what's the need for medical professionals? It's almost like, well, we're erasing an entire aspect of like where some might consider a true diagnosis to come from, by saying, oh, well, I have enough information that for whatever reason I trust from TikTok or a particular influencer, regardless of the platform, I just naturally agree with this person and whatever they say is believable enough to me, so I must be able to make this self-diagnosis. And I guess, to me, I'm 42 years old. I have two young children, girls that are 11 and 9 years old, and just sort of, really dipping their toes in and becoming interested in the social media world and starting to ask for access to platforms like that. And something like this gives me in that position as a parent at this particular age, I have some trepidation about allowing my children to have access to these social media platforms, to give them an extra opportunity to make these sort of self-diagnoses that could be, I guess it's a matter of opinion, but has the potential to be far off from accurate. right? There's not a medical professional necessarily involved in this process. It's potentially just an influencer or a peer even that is saying, well, this is how it is, and I must have ADHD because I behave in these ways, or I have these particular behavioral patterns or something like that, and then making many posts about it, as we've learned through the repetition of advertising or something like that. It becomes believable after things are repeated many times. So here it makes I can see how this self-diagnosis thing has taken off, evolved, or become stronger because of social media. Next part that I wanted to speak on was that of self-discovery. This is on page 66 of the Technoskepticism book. Starts with a couple of quotes. Just number 1, self-discovery, the journey to you. Number 2 is how to begin your self-discovery journey. And number 3, how a journey to self-discovery will set you free. The authors then say, these popular headlines suggest that wellness has extended beyond self-care to self-discovery. The focus is not just on mindfulness or maintenance, but on transformative experiences that will allow you to discover your true self. Corporatized self-discovery rhetoric is often distinctly colonial, suggesting that one may best come to self-knowledge through consumption of the other, as in the whitewashed Buddhism one encounters in commercialized forms of mindfulness. Appeals to ancient wisdom and untouched scenery dot the colonial discourse of finding self-truth. Self-discovery draws upon other wellness topoi, such as, I'm not sure if I'm saying that word right, such as productivity and self-optimization as a means of bridging authenticity with perpetual self-improvement. All right, it goes on a little bit there, but this particular section stuck out to me, and I guess I'll go a little bit personal here, because in particular, this self-discovery portion stood out to me because my wife is a person that is constantly on a journey of self-discovery, self-improvement, those kinds of things, and is really on fire for it. And it's not that that in itself bothers me or is a problem of any kind, but I guess what I'm reading here is that if self-discovery rhetoric is often distinctly colonial, suggesting that one may best come to self-knowledge through consumption of the other, as in the whitewashed Buddhism one encounters in commercialized forms of mindfulness, that really stuck out to me, because oftentimes what my wife is searching for or is maybe feeling connected to is what I'm learning now might be a colonialized version of some sort of ancient Eastern Asian practice of spirituality, of sexuality, or of relationships, anything like that that could be construed as part of self-discovery and self-improvement. But what my wife is leaning into is oftentimes, well, it's not the originators of these ideas that are spreading them or that are keeping my wife Rachel interested. Instead, it's a whitewashed version of those potential concepts that could have been sort of filtered through different lenses of, but then through the mouthpiece of a modern day hip and cool white person, right? So how much of the original rhetoric is really there, and what does that say about the information that is really either being desired or being held on to by people like my wife in this instance? So that's an interesting thing to think about. And maybe it's easier for some people who consume content like this to have awareness of, like, well, this person is just a mouthpiece for these ideas and probably taking their own liberties with those original ideas, and it's kind of gone through a game of telephone and altered itself from where it really began, and has now been sort of twisted and contorted to fit the audience that these people are no doubt trying to gain through social media platforms for monetary and financial reasons, right? Um, the authors also say that the transformation from the hidden self to the known self requires inspiration or mediation of some kind, something to get one over the hump and into a newfound quest for self-actualization. Yeah. So what happens after the journey is over? What happens once you receive all the information? Is that it? Is it a constant inquiry for further information? Is this really the accurate information that we've gotten? And what does it mean for that individual's self-discovery process? Very interesting stuff here. Okay, and finally, on page 106 of Technoskepticism, the heading is Missing What We Once Never Had. I just wanted to go through this last section. So that the authors write that the idyllic view of American life on television at the midpoint of the 20th century showcased small towns or suburbs where kids rode their bikes and played in the street without fear or concern. There were lemonade stands, kids ran in and out of unlocked front doors, and postal workers left packages on the front porch. This romanticized view of the home that so many of us have never experienced provides a metaphor for nostalgia, digital nostalgia as well. It allows us to question whether the image of a previous era exists in our lived reality or in a mediated version of reality that supplants our experiences. Longing for home, on or offline, requires us to come to terms with the realities of our differentiated experiences of home and whether we long for something we ever actually had. Social networking sites had far less regulation and oversight in their early days than now, yet for many users, they also produced much less fear of engagement than users might experience today. The affordances of sites like Black Planet promised a network experience with other users of the same cultural and racial background outside the purview of the dominant group. Because these sites were not considered political organizing platforms and instead replicated the familiarity and mundanity of the home, the church, or the bar, deeply segregated spaces in American culture, they largely escaped the harms brought by interlopers seeking disruption. Just as is the case in the long history of black organizing, outsiders often overlooked these spaces. This largely benefited communities like black folks, queer folks, and others who developed homes and neighborhoods online. Okay, so a romanticized view of the home that many of us never experienced. Yeah, so, you know, it makes you think back to early days of network television or something. I'm thinking, the authors talk about idyllic view of American life and suburbs and lemonade stands and kids unlocked doors, yada yada. I'm thinking Leave It to Beaver in my mind. And it's not like there was a lot of opportunities for a diverse cultural representation in a program such as that, right? Well, for many reasons. And it became the romanticized view that the authors are talking about. But so many people, maybe not at the time of the release of a show like Leave It to Beaver, maybe not so many people had the opportunity to view that program that didn't fit necessarily that romanticized lifestyle. But if we think about it now, then there are so many people that are either misrepresented or not represented by a program such as that. And they don't necessarily have digital nostalgia for that type of content. So is that really a lived experience for the masses? It's certainly tried to be representative of an experience for some, and maybe wanted to play it off as if that was most. when it truly wasn't. So the modern world of fragmented television and streaming services and content available from everywhere allows for the opportunity for voices to be heard that maybe necessarily didn't always have the same opportunity. So I guess perhaps where this goes is that technoskepticism um, is ever decreasing. It's an important concept to be aware of, but also the things to be skeptical of are dwindling, I guess is what I'm saying. So if you think of like television programming from the 1950s and 60s, something like Leave It to Beaver, as I've already mentioned, or I don't know, I Dream of Jeannie, or I Love Lucy, or all those kinds of old black and white television programs that you might think of that really only represented a very specific group of people. Um, there's much more opportunities now for content to be created that has an appeal to much more diverse audiences, so that the skepticism aspect of what's being presented through technology is not as necessary as it might be looking back on things historically. Hopefully, I'm making sense with like how I'm trying to connect all those things there. For now, I think that's probably enough of my analysis of technoskepticism. Again, I'll draw it back to the beginning where I thought it was pretty interesting to read in the introduction about how the authors, kind of collaboratively had the idea for the concept and, the content of the book, and decided that they were going to hold themselves up in a long weekend together and really crank through a big portion of what I imagine this book eventually became. So kind of an interesting method and fun to think about. And overall, a good and important read, I think, to add to sort of my understanding of culture studies and the role of technology and media and all of that. So thanks for listening to me ramble on about this stuff, and I'll see you for the next video.